tried to repress the movement, like in Indianapolis when they started throwing tear gas at us, people didn't run away, they fought back. They fought back for like days, and it was incredibly inspiring. And then the media and the politicians, they tried to shut it down real quick, right? They knew that repression didn't work alone because people fought back. And so they tried to set up this dichotomy between the good protests that took place at 12 and the bad protests that took place at night. And the idea was to scare people from coming out because, I don't want to be associated with that. But people really rejected that divide, and this sort of artificial divide between like what's okay to do and what's not okay to do, as if, the people's violence is anywhere close to the violence of the landlords and the cops and the bosses. I mean, that's what real violence is.
First, I'd like to begin with the obvious but unstated by the state of Indiana that Indianapolis was taken from the Miami Nation in 1818 at gunpoint. This is unceded territory, it is stolen land, and it demands justice. The state and federal government still does not recognize the Miami Nation in Indiana and barely in Oklahoma. We are here today for a lot of different reasons, and a lot of those reasons, actually all of those reasons, come together perfectly. We are here demanding an end to evictions, a moratorium on rents and mortgages, a moratorium on all evictions or foreclosures. But we are also here to stand against the forces which enforce those evictions as a means of criminalizing poverty. I am talking, of course, of the police, of the National Guard, of the private security companies contracted by the United States government and local officials and private companies to force, by hook or crook, families into homelessness. Homelessness, addiction, human trafficking, and other kinds of violence that are not fit to be spoken of publicly. We are here today because all of these things are connected by the singular source of violence in white supremacy that is capital, that is capitalism, that is imperialism. And so we are here today to say, what do we want? Justice! When do we want it? Now! What do we want?
Justice!
When do we want it?
Now!
What do we want?
Justice!
When do we want it?
Now!
What do we want?
Justice!
When do we want it?
Now!
Fight, fight, fight! Housing is a human right!
Fight, fight, fight!
Housing is a human right! Fight, fight, fight! Housing is a human right! Fight, fight, fight! Housing is a human right! Fight, fight, fight!
Housing is a human right!
Fight, fight, fight!
Housing is a human right!
Fight, fight, fight! Housing is a human right! Fight, fight, fight!
Housing is a human right!
Thank you.
Over the past couple months, we've all collectively watched the police intensify their perpetration of organized violence nationally. We've organized to demand that they stop inflicting violence on Black people and other marginalized communities. But we've only been met with even more violence and little to no restitution. We've gotten words, but with no real action. From pepper spray to tear gas to cruel beatings, and now states saying to kidnapping. We say enough is enough.
All right, fine.
There is no reforming the system. There is no reforming a system that constantly and consistently replies to demands for better treatment with even worse treatment. We cannot fix a system that is working exactly how it was designed to work. We cannot beg people who don't care about us to value our lives. They don't care about us, they're not gonna care. We can't beg them to treat us better, they don't care. We cannot keep walking on eggshells and tiptoeing around their rules, because as we've all seen it play out, it doesn't matter what form the protest takes, they will find a way to inflict violence on us. The Party for Socialism and Liberation stands for the overthrow, dismantling, and complete reenactment of the core institutions of the capitalist state, which are the police, military, and the courts. The vast and sophisticated network of organized violence and coercion exists between private property interests and power of the capitalist class. It's not designed to maintain personal safety or to fight crime, as claimed by the school, media system, and the political elite. It ensures stability. Through force and intimidation, and is specifically focused on putting down any challenges to their highly unequal and oppressive social order. Every poor or working class person who has ever engaged in a serious struggle for even the most basic thing, strike for better wages, housing for the homeless, better conditions for students, police protection against police brutality, and all that sort. We all immediately run into the forces of capitalist law and the capitalist state. The essence of these institutions cannot be reformed. No law or executive order can change their fundamental class character from institutions on the side of capitalists to institutions on the side of the poor, working class, and oppressed. Again, we say enough is enough. We recognize that all of our struggles are interconnected and that they're all connected under this big umbrella that is capitalism. This is why we agree that while the police should be abolished, we acknowledge that abolishing law enforcement would of course require abolishing capitalism and capitalist law. The struggle to eliminate the police state must be approached as part of the struggle to overthrow capitalism and replace it with a socialist government and a socialist system. Understanding that the police currently exists to protect private property in the interest of the ruling class is crucial because there is no way that the ruling class will willingly get rid of their own personal protectors. To eliminate the police means to eliminate the social contradictions that leave room for the police to exist. Abolishing the police goes hand in hand with abolishing capitalism because without capitalist interest to protect, there will be no reason for a violent police state to exist.
As we all know, I'm sure, reforms are a compromise. They are not the goal for any of us. You cannot reform a system which does not see those that it oppresses as human beings. You cannot reform that which does not wish to be reformed. You can only tear it down from the root.
It's one thing to have a conversation about, like, you know, Lenin and Marx or whatever, but it's another thing entirely to be like, yo, fucking rich people are fucking this shit up, and we have the ability to do something about it right now. You know what I mean? So, like, that's what I really want everybody to take away from today, is that, like, now is the time to have those difficult conversations, now it's the time for action. There's never been a fucking better time, right? So, I'm gonna go ahead and pass this mic over to whoever, but fucking ACAB, thanks for coming today, guys.
Right, so the statewide eviction moratorium in Indiana ends at the end of this month. So we know an eviction crisis is, you know, right around the corner, and we can't wait for our neighbors to be kicked out of their houses before we start to act. We've got to organize around it now to make sure that, we can't expect politicians to fix the problem before people are actually out on the streets, right? So some local activists from Indianapolis and Bloomington are starting to set up a direct action eviction defense network, which I encourage everyone to sign up for. The link for it is in the discussion page for this event on Facebook, and also you can ask me, or after, I could read it out, but it's a long URL, I don't want to say it now. But the goal is to have, and we know we're not going to stop every eviction, but the goal is to have direct actions during evictions when they come up, and actually blockade the eviction and slow down the process as long as possible, because the longer we can draw it out, the more likely there is to be another resolution. And the city only has so many resources, and if we can draw out the resources, we can keep people in their homes longer. So again, just real fast to summarize, we want to keep people in their homes by slowing down the process. Please look on the discussion page on Facebook for the link.
Thank you so much. If we're going to actually do actionable harm reduction in our communities and not just calling voting harm reduction, which, as somebody who carries naloxone on a daily basis, I find it insulting that people call that harm reduction. We need to act first in our neighborhoods, in our communities, actually form these protective barriers within our homes, within our communities, to make it as difficult as humanly possible to carry out evictions, to carry out foreclosures, to actually bring harmed communities and especially oppressed communities.
Thanks, comrade. Thanks everybody for coming out today, and everybody for coming out over the last couple of months. Thanks for all the organizations who helped put this together today. PSL, the Indiana Undocumented Youth Alliance, Queering Indy, Answer Indiana, Central Indiana DSA, and some other individuals, and also those organizations that have been helping us organize in the streets over these past couple months. You know, I mean, really over the past 3 months, we've witnessed and participated in a truly massive nationwide uprising. I mean, it's really a rebellion. Something that, you know, many of us who are new to the struggle or have been in the struggle for a decade or so or 2 decades haven't seen anything on this scale nationwide. There have been isolated insurrections, you know, in Ferguson and in Baltimore, but there hasn't been, like, you know, dozens, really hundreds of cities in uprising in decades. And it's really something quite profound, and it's allowed thousands of people, really hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, to feel their own power. Because we live in a system that consistently disempowers us, tells us that, you know, the height of political activity is voting for who's going to oppress us every 2 to 4 years. But when we're in the streets, shoulder to shoulder, fighting with people who are different from us for the same things, even if we don't agree on exactly what those are, we really feel the power of the people united. And there's a sort of an explosion of energy that comes with that. But, you know, obviously the street mobilizations have subsided over the past month. You know, there's no longer thousands of people coming out in the streets on a regular basis. And, you know, it's easy to be disheartened and discouraged by that, you know, especially if you're newer and that was like your sort of introduction. All of a sudden, like, thousands of people are spontaneously taking to the streets of Indianapolis in, like, multiple protests that, like, just random people are calling throughout the day, like, for days on end for, like, over a month. And then all of a sudden, you know, there's sort of protests of, like, 50 people, 100 people, 200 people. You know, that sort of quantitative difference can be disheartening. But I think the task, you know, for those of us here today is to really counteract that sort of pessimism, because, you know, the overall thrust of a movement isn't under any one individual or organization's control. You know, the reason why tens of thousands of people took to the streets in Indianapolis wasn't because, like, they saw the best graphic on Instagram or because, like, somebody created the right tagline for the demo. It was because their material conditions compelled them to fight, because the contradictions that they live in and suffer from were boiling over, and they saw other people taking to the streets, and so they took to the streets too, you know. And so uprisings are spontaneous and they're beyond our control, but, you know, the struggle overall is long and hard, and that's why they call it a struggle, right? I mean, not because it's easy and not because it takes place within the course of a couple weeks, right? Struggles are prolonged and they're protracted and they ebb and flow. But we can think, for one, about the incredible gains that we've won already. I mean, so many people's consciousness about police, about white supremacy, about capitalism, and about the state have been transformed radically over the course of, I mean, really even a week in the streets. And if you think about, you know, earlier this year on, I think, January 3rd, we were out in this exact same spot fighting against Trump's war drive against Iran. And if you would have told me at that point that defund the police would be a popular slogan and topic that would be debated on mainstream media within 6 months, I would have been like, yeah, I won't really bet on that. You know, I wouldn't take whatever odds you would give me, because it didn't really look like that was possible. You know, defund the police was like a radical demand, and even from the fewer people in the world, in the country who had heard it, you know, it seemed like it was definitely impossible. but over the course of a couple of months, it goes from being impossible to absolutely practical and realizable, like within not only our lifetimes, but within a matter of years. And that's an amazing accomplishment, you know? And really what we've done is we've changed the balance of forces in Indianapolis and in society. And so all the victories that the people have won, even if they're not directly connected to the struggles, you know, against police brutality, the struggles for justice for Drejon Reed, for Mikhail Rose, you know, I mean, they're still the result of these mass movements. When the 10 energy monopoly corporations petitioned the state to increase energy rates, there was a mass outpouring. There weren't any protests, but there was mass outpouring, you know, petitions and all that, and they got voted down. They got rejected. It's not very often that the monopoly utility energy companies get rejected for, you know, their proposed rate increases. And so, you know, I mean, there's a lot of things that we're still doing now. I mean, the PSL, we're partnered with Indy 10, Black Lives Matter, and some other organizations to demand an end to cash bail, to abolish the Fraternal Order of Police and ICE, to defund and demilitarize the IMPD, to invest in our communities, and to remove the cops from the schools. So since we can't control an uprising, really what can we do? And the only answer is to continue organizing, you know? We gotta continue speaking to and engaging with everyone whose consciousness has been raised recently. And as Maddie said, people whose consciousness can still be raised. There's about 12 million people who are gonna likely be evicted in the next couple of months. In July, a third of renters couldn't make their rent payments in full. And all the bourgeois economists, they say that we haven't seen anything like this since the Great Depression. But, you know, the Great Depression also brought in a wave of militant, mass-based organizing that had unemployed councils, that had eviction defense units, where when the landlords and the cops would go to evict people, people would move their shit right back into their place and they would stay there until the cops left. You know? And I mean, that's totally feasible for us to do right now. And just because there aren't thousands of people in the streets doesn't mean that we can't stop organizing. Because if we stop, you know, we can't do all this in private. Because that's what they want us to do. They want us to, you know, and even the liberals are like, oh, well, just go talk to your racist uncle, you know, like in your bedroom or, I don't know, in your family room, right? But like the struggle has to be public. I mean, I'm not saying you shouldn't do that, but I'm saying like if we aren't in the streets keeping this in sort of the public discourse, then people aren't going to know what to join. They're not going to know what's going on. And so the uprisings were spontaneous. You know, there's a lot of rebellions, but there's fewer revolutions. Rebellions are expressions of the pent-up energy and anger and frustration of the people at the contradictions of the system that we live in. Revolutions are when we resolve those contradictions by creating an entirely new social and economic order. And in the PSL, that's ultimately what we're fighting for, you know? And I mean, some people might say, well, that seems like it's really far-fetched in the United States. Look at state power, all that stuff, you know, the power that strengthens the landlords, the bosses, the police, the military. But, you know, I mean, just like in 6 months, we've seen defund the police go from a sort of like, you know, radical demand sort of advocated by a small group of organizations, and we've seen it go to something that's literally debated on mainstream media, and obviously like the Democrats and stuff are totally co-opting it or whatever, but like I don't take that as a sign of like of disenfranchisement, because they're forced to do it, because if they don't try to co-opt it, they're not going to be relevant to the people, you know. So obviously we have to fight against that, but you know, we shouldn't take that as a disheartening sign. We should take that as a sign of the strength of the movement and the force of consciousness that we've shifted. And you know, the other thing is that, yeah, the uprisings were spontaneous, but they were also connected to the organizing that had been going on for years and decades before in Indianapolis. The demonstrations just like this one, some that were much smaller. You know, some of the demonstrations were 10 people, chalking for Aaron Bailey out there, right? But if we weren't doing those, then the uprisings that happened would have been of a completely different character. You know, it's really easy to sort of go to the streets when there's thousands of people already in the streets. It's much harder to do it when there's only 50 or 100. And so it takes courage and conviction and daring, but there's an old saying that I'll close with, that it's only if you dare to struggle that you'll dare to win. Thank you.